The smell of the old world was of damp clay, the smoke from my father's kiln, and the aroma of my mother's freshly baked barley bread. It was a small world, enclosed within the earthen walls of our village, nestled on a tributary of the Yellow River, far enough away that rumors of horses from the north were just horror stories told around the fire. My name was Altan. Before it became a meaningless whisper, it meant golden, like the color of the ripening wheat in the fields that my father's sweat had watered. The year was 1211, and I had just turned 17. My life was shaped by simple things. My father's calloused but warm hands as he taught me how to mold a pot, my mother's hoarse singing, and the laughter of my little brother as he chased chickens in the yard. My future was mapped out, a path as familiar as the path to the river. I would marry Taran, the blacksmith's son, a boy with muscular arms and a gentle smile. We would have children, and the cycle of life would continue. A life ordinary, mundane, and unimaginably precious. The end does not come as a howling storm. It comes as an earthquake. First, the ground shook. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor, as if the heart of the earth were beating irregularly. Then the dogs began to bark, not threateningly or joyfully, but a mournful, fearful howl before they suddenly fell silent. My father was outside, his head raised, nostrils flaring as if trying to smell danger. "Come inside," he said, his voice low and firm, but I saw a flash of panic in his eyes. Then we heard it. A sound like thunder from a clear sky, a rumbling that grew louder, not from the sky but from the earth. It was the sound of thousands, tens of thousands of horses' hooves crushing the steppe, rushing towards us like a flesh and blood tide. The wooden village gate, which had been meant to keep out wild animals, shattered into pieces like a toy. The first screams were heard, not screams of anger, but screams of utter amazement, of creatures unable to believe the destruction that was coming. Then they appeared. Figures on horseback, moving with a terrifying uniformity. They were unlike any warriors we had ever seen. They wore armor of boiled leather and iron, fur helmets, and their faces, weathered and sun-worn, were brutally flat. They did not scream. Their silence was more terrifying than any roar. The only sound was the tramp of hooves, the whistling of arrows, and the dry thud of them piercing flesh. My father pushed my mother and me into a corner, clutching a firewood axe. It was a desperate gesture, a locust trying to block the path of an ox cart. Our door was kicked open. 2 Mongols entered. Their scent filled the small room: horse sweat, sour milk, leather, and dried blood. One looked at my father, then at the axe, and a contemptuous smile spread across his face. He did not draw his sword. He simply rushed forward, fast as a wolf. My father swung the axe, but the other dodged it, and a gleaming dagger plunged deep into his throat. Blood spurted out, staining the mud wall where my brother had painted his funny pictures. My father fell, his eyes still wide open, looking at me, terrified and helpless. My mother rushed forward, screaming an inhuman, mad sound. The second man grabbed her hair, yanked it back, and slit her throat with a swift stroke of his knife. He did it with the indifference of a butcher slaughtering a sheep. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Something inside me broke. I just stood there, watching my parents' blood mix with the dirt floor, forming a dark puddle. My brother, hiding behind me, began to sob. One of the men turned, his eyes cold. He swung the hilt of the knife, hitting the boy hard in the temple. The crying stopped. The first man, the one who killed my father, stepped toward me. He was tall, and his shadow loomed over me. He raised his hand, his rough, filthy fingers touching my cheek. He sniffed my hair, a deep, animalistic inhale. Then he slapped me, a slap that sent my head crashing against the wall. He ripped my shirt off. The linen ripped, exposing my skin to the cold air and his hungry gaze. He pinned me to the floor right next to my mother's body. The pain was more than physical. It was an insult that tore at my soul. He moved on top of me, muttering words I did not understand. And each thrust was a knife, stabbing into my memory of Taran, of a life that would never be. When he was done, the second did the same. They didn't see me as a person. I was a hole for their pleasure, an object to be conquered. Then they dragged me outside. My village was burning. Flames licked the thatched roofs, sending plumes of black smoke billowing into the sky. The screams had died down, replaced by the moans of the dying and the barbaric laughter of the victors. Bodies lay everywhere: men, women, old people, children. Some had been beheaded, some had their bellies cut open, their entrails spilling out. They piled the surviving women, those like me, into the middle of the village. We were naked or in tatters, covered in blood and dirt. Our eyes were empty, broken dolls. They tied our hands with rough ropes, so tight they made our flesh bleed. They formed a long line and began to herd us away, away from the ashes of the old world. I looked back one last time. My house was a charred skeleton. The bodies of my family lay inside, soon to be consumed by fire or eaten by wild dogs. Taran, I saw him lying near the forge, a large hole in his chest. His gentle smile was gone forever. The journey was a living hell. We walked barefoot on rocky, thorny ground. The sun burned our skin by day, and the dew at night froze us. Women who collapsed from exhaustion or wounds were left to the wild animals. There was no mercy, no stopping. Our food consisted of a few pieces of meat, as hard as stone, and water from filthy puddles. At night, the nightmare continued. The Mongol warriors would pull us out of line and take turns raping us. The cries and pleas would mix with the howling wind on the steppe. I learned to separate my mind from my body. I let them do as they pleased with this shell of flesh, while my mind drifted to a faraway place that smelled of clay and baking bread. I learned to keep quiet. Screaming only excited them. We passed other villages, all suffering the same fate: rubble, bodies, and black smoke. Their empire built on our ashes. Slowly I began to realize the scale. This was no ordinary raid. This was a systematic conquest, a storm consuming everything in its path. After weeks, maybe months, we reached their main camp. It wasn't a camp at all. It was a mobile city of felt and leather, stretching as far as the eye could see. Thousands and thousands of white and gray yurts mushroomed. The smell was strong and overwhelming. Horse dung, smoke, roasting meat, sour milk, and the smell of thousands of unwashed people. The noise was constant: neighing horses, clashing weapons, commands, laughter, music from strange instruments. This is the heart of the monster. And we, the captured women, are just the blood sucked to feed it. They herded us into a separate area, a human cage. Here we were sorted. A man who looked like an official, with a thin beard and small, snake-like eyes, walked along the line, examining us like cattle. He squeezed our breasts, pinched our buttocks, opened our mouths to look at our teeth. He looked at our hands to determine our age and previous occupation. The women who were old, weak, ugly, or seriously injured were separated to one side. I don't know what happened to them, but I never saw them again. The younger and stronger ones, like me, were divided into groups. Some were pushed towards the common soldiers, becoming the common property of a platoon. Some, those who looked beautiful or had noble lineage, based on the clothes left or the confessions made during torture, were sent to another, slightly more luxurious area. For some reason I cannot understand, was chosen for the second group. Perhaps it was my long black hair, or the stubborn silence in my eyes that caught the officer's attention. He pointed at me and said a few words in an unknown language. 2 soldiers grabbed me and dragged me away, separating me from the other miserable women with whom I had shared this hell during my journey. As they dragged me through the vast camp, I looked up. Their flag fluttered above the largest tent in the center. A simple symbol, a falcon or a sun symbol, I didn't know. But it was the symbol of absolute power, the power that had ground my world to dust. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that I was being pulled toward the center of that power, where the monster sat, where the Khan, whom they called Genghis Khan, lived. The life of Altan, the potter's daughter, was over. A new life, a life as a slave, a plaything, a shadow in the conqueror's harem, was about to begin. And the mundanity of it would be more terrible than anything I had ever experienced. The yurt they threw me into was not like the ragged soldiers' tents. It was larger, lined with thick woolen rugs, and the air inside smelled faintly of dried herbs burned to mask the musty smell. But it was still a cage of felt, leather, and wood, imprisoned not by bars but by a cruel reality. Outside was the endless steppe, and on that steppe every eye was an enemy. There were about 20 other women in the tent. They came from everywhere the Mongol horses had gone. Some had the fair skin of Persians, some had the slanted eyes of Khitans, and some were small like me, like Han Chinese. They sat or lay on their mats, a heavy silence hanging over them. It was not a peaceful silence, but the silence of caged animals, each alert, each measuring the others. My tattered clothes were roughly stripped off by two elderly Mongolian women. Their skin was dark, their hands as hard as stone. Without a word, they just shoved me into a large wooden barrel filled with icy water. They scrubbed my body with a soap made from tallow and ash, a painful and humiliating cleansing. They scrubbed away the mud, dried blood, and the smell of the soldiers who had raped me, as if they could wash away the past. But the memory could not be washed away. It was ingrained in my flesh. After the bath, they handed me a silk robe, a luxurious fabric I had never touched before. It was soft against my scratched skin, but the feeling was foreign, a mockery. They brushed my tangled hair with a horn comb. They smeared perfume on me. They were preparing me. Preparing me for what? The answer hung in the air, as clear as the smell of barbecue outside. The first woman to speak to me was a Khwarezmese named Serena. She was a few years older than me, with tired green eyes and a faint scar on her lip. She had been here for over a year, long enough for her initial fear to turn to bitter callousness. "Don't be stubborn," she whispered in broken Chinese, once the guards had left. "It won't help. It will only speed your death." "Death would probably be better," I replied, my voice hoarse. Serena smiled, a smile that held no joy. "You think so now, but humans are strange creatures. We cling to life even if it is hell. You will learn that." She began to explain to me the unwritten rules of this cage. We were part of order or harem of the great Khan himself. But we are not wives. The official wives, Borta, Herlan, and the others, have their own harems with their own slaves and livestock. They are queens, the real power in the world of women. We are only concubines, playthings collected from conquests. Our status depends on one thing only, your favor. "There are hundreds of us like you," Serena said, her voice low. "Don't think you're special. Tonight he may call you, but tomorrow night he'll forget your name. It's our job to please him, whatever he wants. Never look him in the eye unless given permission. Never speak unless asked. And most importantly, never say no." She pointed to a young girl huddled in a corner, trembling uncontrollably. "That girl is a danghang." She bit one of the guards. They broke both her arms. "She's useless now. They'll send her away sooner or later. Where are you going?" I asked. "Give it to soldiers, or sell it to a merchant on the Silk Road, or simply kill it. They don't waste food on useless things." The bluntness of Serena's words made me shudder. This was a world of ruthless pragmatism. My worth lay solely in this body, in its ability to serve and reproduce. Life in the tent was one long, empty day. We didn't have to do the hard work that the other slave girls did. We just sat and waited to be called. The boredom was a form of torture. It gave me too much time to think, to remember. The images of my parents falling, my brother's cries, Taryn's smile. They came back to haunt me. To keep myself from going mad, I began to observe. I observed the other women. There were those like Serena who had accepted their fate and managed to survive through cunning and obedience. There were those who still had hope in their eyes, whispering about futile escape plans. There were those who had completely broken down, just sitting there staring into space, their minds long dead, and there were others who sought to rise within this corrupt system. A Khitan woman named Chulun was one example. She was beautiful, intelligent, and ruthless. She had learned Mongolian, and she knew how to curry favor with compliments and small gifts. She was one of the great Khan's favorites, and she saw us all as competition. She would seek to bring down anyone who seemed to be getting attention. One insinuation, one slander, and a girl could be gone forever. I learned that silence was my best weapon. I tried to be invisible. I ate little, spoke little, and kept my head down. I listened, learning every word of Mongolian I could hear. Nokoi, dog. Us, water. Mori, horse. Sea, heaven. Each word is a piece of the puzzle, helping me understand more about the world of my captors. Food was a constant reminder of our status. We were fed meat, usually boiled lamb, and drank irag, a sour, pungent, fermented mare's milk. It was the nomadic diet, rich in protein and fat, but it was foreign to my stomach, accustomed to grains and vegetables. Many of us fell ill, with diarrhea and stomach aches, but no one cared. Weakness meant death. The first time I saw him was not in a private audience. One afternoon he passed our tent, surrounded by his personal guard, Hukashig. They are tall, absolutely loyal warriors, wolves that protect the king of the jungle. Genghis Khan was not as tall as I had imagined. He was of average build, but there was something about him that radiated absolute authority. His shoulders were broad, the steady gait of a man who had spent his life on horseback. His long braided hair was streaked with gray. His face was lined with wrinkles, a map of battles, intrigues, and losses. But his eyes were the most terrifying thing. They were small, sharp, and deep, like a falcon's. They saw through everything, betraying no emotion, only cold calculation. He did not glance toward our tent. We, with all our prepared beauty, were not worth his attention. We were just part of his spoils. That night the door of our tent was opened. A eunuch, a castrated handman, entered. He held a lantern and called out a name. Altan. My heart stopped. My whole body froze. Serena, who was lying next to me, gently pinched my arm. "Go," she whispered. And remember what I said. I stood up, my legs shaking. The eunuch led me outside. The steppe night was cold. The sky was full of stars, but they did not bring peace. They only emphasized my smallness and loneliness. He led me to a much larger tent, heavily guarded. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of mutton fat, leather, and man. Genghis Khan was sitting on a low stool beside a small fire. He was eating, using a small knife to cut pieces of meat from a roast lamb chop. He wore no armor, just a simple silk robe. He looked almost normal. But there was nothing normal about this man. The eunuch motioned for me to kneel. I did so, my eyes fixed on the carpet. There was a long silence. All I could hear was his chewing and the crackling of the fire. I could feel his eyes scanning me, assessing me. Finally, he said in a low, hoarse voice, "Where do you come from?" I was surprised when he spoke Chinese, albeit with a slight accent. I gathered my courage and answered softly, "Your Majesty, I come from a village near the Yellow River. What's your name?" "Altan, sir." He nodded, as if the name meant nothing. "What can you do?" The question was vague. What? I knew pottery, I knew how to cook, I knew how to sew, but I knew that wasn't what he wanted to hear. I kept quiet. He stood up and walked towards me. I could smell him, the smell of an older man, the smell of power. He lifted my chin, forcing me to look into his eyes. There was no desire in them. They held only the curiosity of a scientist examining a specimen. "Take off your clothes," he ordered. My hands shook as I removed my silk robe. It fell to the ground, leaving me naked before him. I felt a wave of humiliation rise up in me, but I fought it back. I was an object. Objects had no shame. He looked me over, from head to toe. "Slim," he observed, "but strong." Then he motioned for me to lie down on a pile of furs nearby. I obeyed. My heart pounded in my chest. I braced myself for the roughness, for the pain. But it didn't come as I expected. He didn't rush. He explored my body slowly, almost indifferently. His hands, calloused by reins and weapons, moved over my skin. He didn't kiss me, didn't speak tender words. This wasn't love, nor was it pure lust. It was an act of possession, an assertion of supremacy. He was the conqueror, and I was the conquered territory. My body was another battlefield he had won. While he was inside me, I looked up at the roof of the yurt. Through the chimney at the top of the yurt, I could see a sliver of night sky. I focused on a single star, trying to make myself into that cold, distant point of light. When he was done, he rolled over and almost immediately fell asleep. His snores were steady and heavy. I lay there, not daring to move, listening to the breathing of the man who had destroyed my world. In that moment, he was neither a god nor a demon. He was just a sleeping man, a man who could be killed. The thought flashed through my mind, dark and seductive. A knife, a stab, but I knew it was madness. The keshig would tear me apart before the blade could sink in. I lay there until nearly dawn. The eunuch returned and motioned for me to dress and leave. When I emerged from the tent, the first light of dawn was breaking over the steppe. No one told me what to do next. I simply returned to my felt cage, where the other women watched me with curiosity and envy. I had survived my first night with the great Khan. But I knew this was only the beginning. I was marked. I was no longer invisible. And in this cruel world, the attention of those in power was both a privilege and a death sentence. The Great Khan's attention was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it brought me small privileges. I was moved to a less crowded yurt, shared with only 3 other women, all favored. Our rations were better, with more meat and sometimes dried fruit brought back from conquered lands in the south. We were given silken clothes and simple jewelry. Materially, my life had improved. But spiritually, I was walking a tightrope stretched over an abyss. The eunuch, named Liu Sheng, began to notice me. He was a cunning old fox, having survived many dynasties and purges. He knew how to read people and manipulate them. He taught me the complex rules of the harem, things that Serena only knew superficially. He taught me how to make tea the Mongolian way, how to pour wine mustache without offending the owner, a massage to soothe the aches and pains of a man who has spent his life in the saddle. The Great Khan does not like talkative people, Liu Sheng told me one day, his voice shrill and toneless. Nor does he like fools. You must learn to be a listening shadow, a mirror that reflects what he wants to see. He is tired of war and the flattery of generals. He wants peace with you. I became a good student. I learned to be smartly silent, to use my eyes to convey submission, to anticipate his needs before they were spoken. On the nights he called, I would serve him tea, massage his shoulders and back. Sometimes he would talk, not to me, but as if to himself. He would tell of the battles of his youth, of the betrayal of his sworn brother Jamuka, of the death of his father. I just listened, without judgment, without comment. I was a wall, a well in which he could unburden himself, and of course, there was sex. It was still an act of possession, but it was less brutal. Sometimes it was almost tender, but it was the tenderness of a master with a pet, not between 2 equals. I learned to respond, to feign pleasure. It was part of the role, part of the survival game. I detached my body from these acts, turned it into a tool. But each time, a little part of me died. This favor brought me enemies. Chulun, the beautiful Khitan woman, saw me as a threat. She could not attack me directly, but she used more subtle tricks. She began to spread rumors that I had used black magic to seduce the Great Khan, that I was a spy for the Song dynasty. In a world full of superstition and paranoia, these accusations were dangerous. One time, a jade hairpin of Chulun's disappeared. She wept and insinuated that only newcomers, people of lowly Han blood, would steal. Liu Sheng summoned me and questioned me. I looked him straight in the eye, a cold calm settling over me. If I wanted to take something, I said, I wouldn't take something as useless as a hairpin. I would take a knife. That answer seemed to satisfy Liu Sheng. He knew I wasn't that stupid. The investigation was over, but I knew Chulun wouldn't stop. The war in the harem was just as brutal as the battles on the battlefield. Only our weapons were words, lies, and crocodile tears. I realized that to survive, I could not be just a shadow. I needed allies, even the weakest ones. I began sharing my good food with Serena, who had been transferred to the tents for disgraced women. I gave her a warmer coat when winter came. It was not pure kindness, it was an investment. Serena knew every nook and cranny, every rumor in the camp. She was my eyes and ears. I also learned to take advantage of my position. When I was with the Great Khan, I listened to his discussions with his generals. I heard about the campaigns in the west against the Khwarezmian Empire. I heard about the cities that had been destroyed, Samarkand, Bukhara, Otrar. I heard the numbers of the dead, the plunder, the women taken as slaves. Each name, each number was a stab to my heart, a reminder of the fate of my own village. But I buried my feelings behind a wall of ice. I used this information carefully. I would hint to Liu Sheng about a general who was showing signs of arrogance, or a vassal tribe that was showing signs of discontent. Small bits of information, but enough to prove my usefulness. Liu Sheng in turn protected me from Chulun's schemes. We had formed an unspoken alliance based on mutual interests. Life went on in a strange rhythm, a mixture of constant fear and numbing boredom. I witnessed unimaginable brutality. Once, a group of Persian slaves tried to escape. They were caught. To make an example of them, the Mongols skinned them alive. Their screams echoed through the camp for hours. I vomited until my bile turned green and yellow, but I also witnessed moments of a strange humanity. An old Mongol warrior who had lost an arm in battle would sit outside his tent, playing a stringed instrument and singing sad songs about the steppe. Mongolian children, born and raised in the camp, still played and laughed innocently in the face of the sea of blood around them. And then there was the Great Khan. He was a man of contradictions. On the one hand, he was a butcher who ordered the slaughter of millions. On the other hand, he had moments of profound wisdom. He created a code of laws, called Yasa, to rule his empire. He forbade adultery, theft, and lying. He established an efficient postal system. He tolerated all religions. I have seen him speak with equal respect to Buddhist monks, Muslim clerics, and Nestorian priests. He was a monster, but a monster with vision. One night, after we had made love, he lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling of the tent. "Are you afraid of me, Altan?" he asked suddenly. I hesitated. A wrong answer could cost me my life. "The goddess who respects the Great Khan," I answered safely. He chuckled, a dry sound. "Respect is another form of fear. I have lived my whole life in fear of others. I have used it to build this empire. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be loved." It was the first time I saw a weakness, a chink in his armor. But it only lasted a moment. The next moment, his eyes were cold and distant again. Years passed. My body changed. It adapted to the nomadic life. My skin became tanned by the sun and wind. My hands became calloused. I learned to ride, not as well as the Mongols, but enough not to fall off. I bore him a son. It was an event that changed everything. My son, whom I named Batu, was not a prince. He was the son of a hand-slave girl. He would never inherit anything. But to me, he was everything. As I held him in my arms, feeling his warmth, I felt an emotion I thought had died long ago. Love. Batu's birth solidified my position. In Mongolian culture, a woman who bore a man a son was given more respect. Chulun no longer dared to openly challenge me. But it also brought a new fear, a fear greater than death, fear for my son's safety. The world was too cruel to children. And in the harem, a child without a recognized father was a vulnerable target. I began to take my game more seriously. I was no longer just trying to survive. I was fighting for my son's future. I gathered every piece of information, forged every relationship, and silently eliminated every threat. I had become a true ghost, a player in the cruel game of power in the Mongol Empire. The potter girl named Altan was dead. In her place was a different creature, molded from loss, fear, and fierce maternal love. I had learned the lesson Serena had taught me. Humans cling to life. And now my life was tied to my son's. I would do anything, become anyone, to protect him. Time on the steppe is measured not in days but in seasons. Summers are harsh, with dust storms and scorching heat. Winters are long and brutal, with snow covering everything and a cold that can kill a horse if it stands still for too long. Spring and autumn are brief, fleeting moments of life and death. I have witnessed nearly 10 such cycles. 10 years. A third of my life has been consumed by this vast, empty land. The Great Khan had aged. His gait was no longer as steady as before. Long coughs shook his chest at night. Old wounds from his youth began to plague him on damp days. But his mind remained as sharp as a knife. He still ruled his empire with an iron fist, still plotted new conquests. In 1226, he decided to launch one last campaign, to punish the Western Xia kingdom for refusing to send troops to aid in the war in the West. Order. The giant was moving again, a river of people and cattle flowing south. My son Batu was 8 years old now. He was a true Mongolian child, dark-skinned, muscular, and already able to ride a horse like a little warrior. He spoke Mongolian better than Chinese. When he looked at me, I sometimes saw in his eyes the strangeness of a culture that had taken him over. I tried to teach him a few words of Chinese, told him stories of the village by the river, but to him they were just fairy tales. His real world was yurts, horses, and the sound of swords. My place in the harem was settled. I was no longer the favorite. The Great Khan, by nature a conqueror, always needed new faces, new lands to explore. But I had become a familiar part, a quiet, reliable presence. I was like an old but useful piece of furniture. He still called for me, but not as often. Those nights we would often just talk. He spoke of his legacy, of his 4 legitimate sons, Juchi, Chagatai, Ogedei and Tolui. He worried about the discord between them. An empire built on horseback cannot be ruled on horseback, he once said. But my wolf cubs only know how to fight. They do not know how to rule. I realized that his greatest fear was not death, but the disintegration of what he had spent his life building. He had united the tribes, but he could not unite his own family. The Western Shah campaign was fierce. The Tanguts resisted bravely, and the Mongols responded with their usual brutality. Cities fell one by one. News of massacres returned to camp, but they no longer shocked me. I had become numb. The pain of others was a distant echo. My existence had shrunk to revolve around Batu's safety. That winter, an accident occurred. While hunting, the great Khan fell from his horse. It was a wild horse that he had insisted on taming himself, a sign of pride for an old man who refused to accept his limitations. He suffered serious internal injuries. The magicians and physicians did all they could, but his health was rapidly declining. The atmosphere in the camp was tense. Princes and generals huddled together, whispering in their tents. A silent power struggle was underway, even while the old ruler was still alive. For women like us, it was a dangerous time. When a Khan died, his harem was divided among his successors as part of his inheritance. Our fate depended on the will of the new masters, who might not even know we existed. I used every connection I had built over the years. I sought out Liu Sheng. The old eunuch was also worried about his future. Prince Ogdetai seems likely to be the next in line, he told me. He is generous, but also a drunkard and easily influenced. Prince Tolui is a great warrior, but too cruel. Chagdatai is strict and difficult. What about us? I asked. We are leaves in the wind, Liu Sheng replied, his eyes staring into space. Whatever wind blows, we must fly in that direction. I knew I couldn't rely on anyone else. I had to create my own wind. I began gathering the valuables I had saved. A few pieces of jewelry, some gold and silver. I sewed them into the lining of Batu's shirt. If the worst came to the worst, we would have to be ready to flee. But where? Leaving this camp was suicide. The steppe would swallow us whole. The great Khan lay dying for months. He lay in his tent, his body atrophied, but his eyes still fiercely sharp. He ordered that his death be kept secret until the Western Jia campaign was completely over, so as not to shake the morale of his army. One night in August 1227, he called me. It was the last time. There was only him and me in the tent. The fire in the hearth was almost out. His breathing was raspy. Altan, he whispered, his bony hand finding mine. We're almost to Tengger. I said nothing, just squeezed his hand. I have lived a full life, he continued. I have known it all, victory, defeat, love, hate. I have created something from nothing. They will remember me. Whether a hero or a demon, they will never forget Temujin. He coughed loudly, blood oozing from the corner of his mouth. Your son. And mine, he said, breathing hard. He has my blood in him. Teach him to be strong. This world has no place for weakness. Those were the last words he said to me. A few hours later, he passed away in silence. On his orders, the death was kept secret. The body was secretly prepared for transport to his homeland in Mongolia. A military escort was formed. Legend has it that they killed every living creature they encountered along the way, so that no one would reveal the location of the grave. For us in the harem, his departure was like the sun going out. The order we had grown accustomed to collapsed. The princes began to openly vie for power. The harem was divided. Some women were given to Ogdetai, others to Tolui. Some were given to the generals as rewards. Batu and I were assigned to Tolui, the youngest son, a warrior renowned for his ferocity and brutality. Life under Tolui was even harsher. He lacked his father's insight or vision. He cared only for war, wine, and women. I was just one of his hundreds of trophies, a pale shadow of his father's past. For many years, I lived an anonymous life. I raised Batu in that brutal world. I taught him how to survive, how to hide his emotions, how to observe and bide his time. I succeeded. He grew up to be a true Mongol warrior, a survivor. Sometimes, on quiet nights, when I look up at the starry sky above the steppe, I wonder about my life. Did the Altan girl on the banks of the Yellow River really exist? Or is it just a dream? Who am I? Am I a Han, a Mongol, or just a ghost caught between two worlds? I never found the answer. Genghis Khan's legacy is more than a vast empire. It is not just written in the annals of history or in the DNA of millions. His legacy is etched in the shattered souls of countless people like me. We are the untold stories, the forgotten names. We are the price paid for the greatness of one man. I died of old age in a foreign land, surrounded by people who spoke a language that was not mine. When I closed my eyes for the last time, I did not see the face of Genghis Khan or Tului. I saw a pottery kiln, a man with warm hands, and a laughing boy chasing chickens. The wind blows across the steppe, carrying dust and whispers of the past. It blows over the ruins of cities, over unmarked graves. And if you listen closely, you might hear my story in it. The story of a woman caught in a storm who learned to live in the eye of the storm and in the end became part of that endless wind.